I'm going by the clock on the wall, so it would be nice to start pronto, on time. So good morning. Yes, thank you. Look, I would like to ask, I would like to seek the leave of my councillor colleagues this morning to have our meeting chaired by Councillor Karen Hunt. Yesterday, Councillor Hunt attended the run sheet meeting. I was out of town, and I do have to be on a flight just after midday today. So to save any disruption, I wonder if I could ask that Karen, that Councillor, thank you. So I have a mover and a seconder. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll put that motion that Councillor Karen Hunt chair our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting this morning. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, no mai, haere mai, and welcome everyone to our SPNF Strategy, Policy and Finance meeting on the 14th of March. I'd like to welcome everyone who's watching online as well. We are being live streamed, and just a reminder to my colleagues to please put your cell phones away unless you have sought to leave to have them on your desk for some important call you expect to receive. And please also your iPads, which many of us are using, could you make sure that they're on silent so that should you get any emails or anything else coming through, that they also don't interrupt the flow of the meeting. So thank you for that. I'll just go through our apologies. At this point we have apologies from Mr. Berryman Kemp, and we have one from Mr. Kumar, Councillor Kumar, beg your pardon, and also, yes, Councillor Bentley, I believe, is an apology at this point. So if there's no, oh yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, just heard from Her Worship, so she's an apology for quite a late arrival.
Okay, for lateness. Thank you. Oh yes.
Could I just signal that I do need to leave at 11:45? Yes. Should we still be in session? Thank you.
So early departure for Councillor Raukawa-Tait. Yes, Councillor Maxwell.
I realise that we've been informed that it's finishing at 3, but if it goes longer than 3, I'll get to catch an aeroplane now to Wellington.
I expect we will be wrapped up well before 3.
Okay.
Councillor Maxwell, yes.
Thank you.
That is certainly the intention this morning. Now, are there any declarations of interest? Anyone? Oh, a mover and a seconder, please, for that the apologies be accepted. We had Councillor Gould and Mr. Thomas. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, there appear none. Are there any urgent items on the agenda this morning? No. That's fantastic. What I will do just before we move into the confirmation of the minutes, I might ask Councillor Tapsell to speak to an item that about the Children for Climate Change, and she would just there is a meeting happening. So Councillor Tapsell, if you could just brief the committee, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, thank you for the opportunity to ensure that our elected members are informed of this wonderful event that our local students are actually holding. So as you're aware, there is a global movement at the moment from students, started from a young girl named Greta, who protested for a number of days actually outside Parliament on the impacts of climate change and in their belief the inaction of decision makers, business leaders and politicians to ensure that their future is maintained and that they will be able to enjoy the natural resources that we do. So as well as thousands of other students around New Zealand, we do have Rotorua students which are led, and it's very interesting, it's a collaborative effort from Girls High, JPC and Western Heights, and they've all come together and decided that actually Rotorua needs to be part of this global movement as well. So there will be a strike coming to council. They're meeting at the Village Green at 2 p.m. on Friday. We've had 150 people that have registered to participate in the march, and those are just the ones that have registered. We've still got another day for them to do that, and they would like to come to council and present to the elected members here as well. So an invite has gone out to the councillors. I believe also the community board members is going out today, and Te Tato members as well. And essentially the young people of all sorts of strikes and movements, this is a very positive one. They have a lot of positive energy behind this, and they're really looking forward to being heard and being seen and being received by elected members. So it would mean a lot to them if elected members who were available could be here at the council 3 p.m. on Friday to greet what's currently 150, we'll see what that number does, students, and no doubt their families and support as well. So wonderful initiative, and thank you for the opportunity to ensure that we're all informed that Student Strike for Climate Change will be arriving here at council on Friday.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell.
I'd like to move that
hang on a moment, Councillor Sturt, Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to ask you a question. Councillor Tapsell, did you get my apology last night? Oh, that's come. Okay. Yeah, apologies. I'll be away in Wellington all day, but congratulations through to Councillor Tapsell, working with the youth and the young people. This is one march on council I would have loved to have been here for, having accepted many in the past, but kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Tanya, that you've been liaising with our young students from the city of our district. I just wondered if we could receive our students here in our chamber. I mean, this is where we do our work. I suspect many of them haven't been in the chamber before, and it would be appropriate that they be received here in the manner, because they are serious about the issue, and I think it would be good if they could be received in here where we make the decisions that impact on our city. So I hope that can be taken under consideration. Thank you.
I will let Councillor Tapsell work with the staff to see. It may depend on numbers. We have about a 200 capacity in the chamber, so if it swells significantly, then we'll not only have a full house, we'll have a full galleria as well. So, but I will leave that. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Councillor Tapsell and I have had a discussion, and Her Worship tenders her apology because she'll be out of town, potentially, subject to flight arrangements. In the event that she is, she will be leaving a message for me with for the students. My question is to Councillor Tapsell, there's been some discussion on the AM show this morning around the nature of students taking strike action, and from my part, good on them. If they're passionate about the issue, will they be taking the whole day off school, or are they just knocking off at lunchtime to assemble and take action? That's my question.
Please answer. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. It is a debate that is being brought up as well, whether it's appropriate for students to be leaving school. I assure you it's not a decision that they're taking lightly, and the students here in Rotorua, given the nature and the importance and their passion to actually be at school, which is great, they've decided not to take the whole day off, and that's the purpose of it being at 2 p.m, so they can continue to stay at school the majority of the day and just knock off an hour earlier.
Thank you for that answer. That's excellent.
Thank you. And Councillor Sturt.
Chair, I'd like to move that the report on the global movement climate change from Councillor Tapsell be received. I think it should be in the minutes, because I think this is an event that will go down as an affirmative action by young people to actually take hold of an issue that they believe isn't being taken seriously. But I too join Councillor Raukawa-Tait in giving the option to the organisers that they do meet us here in the chamber. If that's not appropriate for the organisers, well, so be it. We'll meet them downstairs. But I understand the protocol will be they will be presenting their views or their written précis of what they're trying to achieve. And I think that as many of us that can attend should attend, and I'm happy to be there. So
thank you.
Well done. So I'll move that way, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll have a seconder, and also thank you, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. And just final words from you, Councillor Tapsell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Regarding bringing them into the council chamber, having a discussion with the children, they thought it would be appropriate to be outside. Given the precedent that we have set with other strikes, I actually thought it may be inappropriate if we allow them to come inside when we haven't allowed other strikes as well. So we've decided that out of respect for the precedent and what's occurred in other strikes that were important issues as well, the students are quite happy to just be outside. And of course there is the opportunity in future and even later on that day for them to come up and have a look around this area, because it is a public area at the end of the day. And yeah.
Thank you. I actually agree with that. I think it raises a much more public profile if it is out in the public. Yes.
Sorry, and just the last point that I did want to say, just wrapping this up, and thank you for your messages of support. And I do know that the Mayor is currently trying to change her flight because it's very important for her as well to be here to greet the students. But I did just want to say how proud I am of us actually here in Rotorua, that we have this issue and we can say with our hand on our heart that we are one of the leading councils in New Zealand on action against climate change, not only for adapting to but also mitigating for it. And the work that we've been doing through the Sustainable Living portfolio and led by our amazing staff such as Rosemary Viskovich, we already are starting to develop a plan. We're already in the process of it, and as you remember, we've already done the carbon emissions audit report. So we are actually leading New Zealand here in Rotorua on adapting for climate change. So I'm very proud that we're a step ahead of everyone else, although we do have a big job ahead of us.
Thank you, and I think that was a really good opportunity to hear and keep up to date with what our young people think and feel. So thank you for that, Councillor Tapsell. Now we move on to confirmation of minutes on page 7. And I ask for a mover and seconder for the motion that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 14th of February 2019 be confirmed as true and correct. And thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Any corrections to those minutes? If not, then I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Aye, carried. Thank you. Now, that we move on to staff reports on page 12. So this is the recommendation 1 is the deliberation for the proposal for a new prostitution bylaw 2019, and I'll call for a mover and seconder to receive the report. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. That the report, deliberations and proposal for new prostitution bylaw 2019 be received. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Okay, thank you. And we have Rosemary Viskovich to speak to this. Thank you, Rosemary.
Morena. Sorry, from climate change to prostitution. So this paper is really around the deliberations on the previous hearing on the prostitution bylaw changes. So the prostitution bylaw has been through a consultation period, and you've heard from three written and 2 oral submitters. And this paper really outlines the key issues to be considered today. The legal framework that allows us to have a bylaw is set by the Local Government Act and the Prostitution Reform Act. We've had a bylaw for some time. This is a standard 10-yearly review. Bylaws have been challenged in the High Court from other councils in the past, particularly on some of the matters which some of our submitters have actually raised again for us during the submissions. Basically, our bylaw, as it is at the moment, controls the location of brothels and other commercial sex premises in our district, and also the content and establishment of signage relating to those businesses. The bylaw also prohibits soliciting and touting for commercial sexual services in public places. And in particular, the bylaw prohibits establishing a brothel anywhere in the district outside the CBD, although there has been some different interpretations of what was intended by the bylaw. It also says that brothels can't be at a ground floor level in the CBD. So we received 3 written submissions, and 2 of those people then presented to us. The Particular issues they raised were around whether the small owner-operator brothels were allowed outside the CBD, some questions around the scope of advertising limitations, and again around clause 4.1 around touting and soliciting in a public place. So there was I think there was a really good hearing held, there were some good questions asked and able to really discuss some of those issues. In response to those issues, the smaller owner-operated brothels, so I'm advised by the staff who are in the operational side of council that there was never an intention to prohibit SUBs, equivalent to SUBs, within the district, because the district plan allows smaller owner-operated businesses to operate under certain terms. So there was no intention, the bylaw was intended to control the larger brothels in the CBD. It wasn't intended to restrict the small owner-operated businesses, but that was how the submitters had interpreted it. So what the suggestion is that one of the things we should do is to make it really clear in the bylaw that we're not intending to restrict the small owner-operated businesses, and there's a clause proposed to define that and explain that. With regard to advertising, the bylaw is only able to control advertising that relates to the signage in a public place of the brothels. So some of their questions were around wider issues around advertising, which are actually covered by the Prostitution Reform Act and are largely weren't matters which are actually restricted. And then section 4 around soliciting and touting. So this was an interesting one again during the hearings. We've previously had legal advice that prohibiting soliciting and touting in a public place is supportable, if not through the Prostitution Reform Act, then through the Local Government Act around protecting from nuisance in a public place. However, the submitters did point out that in fact we don't particularly have a street prostitution problem, and that other places have managed that problem in different ways, not through a bylaw. And the example was given of Auckland and Wellington, which no longer have bylaws at all for this matter, and Christchurch, which has a bylaw which has responded to these very issues by not restricting SUBs and not restricting soliciting and touting in a public place. So there are some other examples out there of how other people have approached the issues which were raised during the submissions. So the suggestion at this point, and I guess based on the way that the questions went during the hearings, is that we've proposed some changes, and those are really to identify and define the small owner-operated businesses and explain that they are not restricted to the CBD, and to remove entirely clause 4, which is around the soliciting and touting in a public place. So that's what we've proposed for your consideration, and I think I'll leave it there and look at some questions.
Thank you very much, Rosemary, for that. Now I will invite questions and discussions, and I have Councillor Sturt, Councillor Raukawa-Tait and Councillor Kent. Councillor Sturt.
Madam Chair, I was chair of the original council subcommittee which instituted the bylaw in 2009, 2010, when we had extensive public hearings on those, and those four items that are in clause 3, which are seen to be changed, are a little bit concerning, particularly the removal of touting and soliciting in the CBD, as I understand that Christchurch has had a real serious problem with this, and that there wasn't sufficient teeth in the Local Government Act with the public nuisance issue, and that was an issue that was challenged in court. However, I wasn't here when the hearings or the submissions were made, but I'd be interested to know the legal advice based on removing that clause. And the other one was, I understood a small owner-operated brothel was less than two people working in that particular premise. Is that still a definition, or has that changed?
Through you, Madam Chair, so I actually just checked that before, because the definition in the Prostitution Reform Act of a small owner-operated brothel is 4 or fewer workers. In our district plan, the definition is no more than one other person who doesn't live there. So I think you could possibly have 3 people who lived there operating and 1 person who didn't, or 1 person who lived there and 1 person who didn't. But yeah, I hope that helps.
And on the soliciting and touting, do you think the other acts are strong enough for us to manage those, or is that what regulatory have said?
The local government, if we thought that, I guess the power to have a bylaw, and the reason why you have a bylaw is to address a problem where there is no other way of addressing it, and it's the best way to address it. And I guess the challenge is that we don't particularly have a street prostitution problem, so Sorry?
Didn't have a soliciting issue was because we had the bylaw, and the bylaw specifically restricted the touting and the soliciting on the street in the CBD. So the prostitution collective clearly understood that was the intention of the original bylaw. What I'm afraid of is that this bylaw, this clause is removed, that could start happening.
The difficulty is that prostitution is not illegal, so telling people they can't,
Councillor Sturt, just let Rosemary
because
finish.
the Act says prostitution is not illegal, then really to say that people aren't allowed to do that in a public place, it has to be because we're concerned that it's a public nuisance and it's under the Local Government Act that we would strike this bylaw. So we just need to be careful because there are two pieces of legislation with slightly different purposes, but the ultimate aim, I guess, is around the safety of our community, and that's also the safety of those workers. So the prostitution collective, their view is that the safety of their workers is also an important part of the Act, and that where we drive it underground, that actually decreases their safety. So it's a complex issue, and there's lots of different perspectives to it. So I don't think there's necessarily one right answer. These are all really valid issues.
Can I just enlighten you that when the collective in 2009, they were also, and we were as a community, were also concerned about the safety of the workers as such, and that by not allowing them to tout or solicit on the streets, that's moving cars and on footpaths, etc., we believe the safety aspect of their workers was being protected to the nth degree. But I'm satisfied, Madam Chair, that if there is a public nuisance issue with that, as there was in Christchurch, that can be handled under other legislation. And I agree with you, it's not illegal, and it is a legal enterprise. However, there are safeguards not only for the workers but also our community, and I think the bylaw covers those areas of concern within our community. So I'm happy with the 4 recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Stern. Now I have Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really rather sorry that we've got this prostitution bylaw, because really, when I heard the Prostitutes Collective, whose submissions are always, whatever they submit on, are very good, very well thought out. They talked about Auckland and Auckland and Wellington, and how they don't have a prostitution bylaw, and if our two big cities don't, and they've got around it, there's mechanisms in place without having to have a bylaw. So it really rather bugs me that here we are in Rotorua, we have to have a prostitution bylaw. So that's food. I got that off my chest. But look, I just want to ask you, I couldn't find it in here, Rosemary. I just said this is the question I'm getting to. Have we removed the restriction applied to ground floor location? Did we do that? Because I couldn't see it.
No, we didn't remove that. We didn't have any submissions or feedback from the businesses in town. And one of the comment around the ground floor premises was really around disability access in particular that was raised. But that was also in light of the submitters believing that small owner-operated businesses weren't able to operate in the suburbs. Now, if there are one of the key arguments they had was around there being options and different options that were accessible for people to use safely. So if it's not only businesses with signage in town, that obviously we wanted to restrict how that looks in the inner city, but if they're more discrete businesses which are accessible, then there's not the same reason to suddenly say, well, actually the brothels in town should be able to have ground floor premises.
Well, sometimes, Madam Chair, I do wish we would listen to the people who are actually in the business, but however, as I say, it's a bit of a shame that we have to have a prostitution bylaw in our city, because we've got other means of addressing any issues that might come around, as we heard from the collective. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Raukawa-Tait. Now, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Raukawa-Tait. I cannot see any reason for this bylaw whatsoever. Prostitution is no longer illegal in New Zealand. Therefore, why are we legislating against it? We should not be doing so. Auckland don't, Wellington don't, and the changes that have been proposed to it are totally ambiguous and totally unsatisfactory. I'll give you an example. You've said by implementing that SUBs aren't affected by the location aspect, right? So that doesn't apply to them. Well, hang on. Does that also mean that the ground level clause doesn't apply to them? I mean, it's totally ambiguous. It is not properly worded at all, and I personally do not see for 1 second why we even need the thing. And I signify at this stage that it is my intention to move a motion that this be referred back to staff and the RMA Policy Committee to see whether in fact there is sufficient within the district plan that covers what we're trying to achieve here, because I believe there is already. For example, signage is already covered in residential areas and in the commercial districts. Neon signs aren't permitted, etc., etc. That's all in the district plan anyway. So it's only a question, a SUB, or a small owner-operated brothel, is a small business. It is a permitted activity to run a small business in a residential dwelling, as long as it's of a small enough size. So why should we be discriminating against this, which is not an illegal act? I think we've got it all wrong, and I agree with Councillor Tait that it's got to go. We've got to get rid of it. If we have to make a few minor changes to the district plan, then at least we've got rid of a load of paperwork that we actually don't need, and which is quite honestly in this day and age draconian.
Councillor Kent, there's 2 options here. You could put that as a motion, because it's quite different to what we're debating here. Probably what I would prefer is to let the rest of the debate carry out, unless it's on a similar line, and let Rosemary respond to that, and then decide whether you want to put that, and that will give you an opportunity to formulate some words around that if you wish to put.
Quite happy with that. Thank you, Madam.
Clarification, Madam Chair, would it not be appropriate as per standing orders that should that motion be lost, that Councillor Kent has given notice of his intention to put another motion? Because we've got to dispose of the current motion.
Yes, we do, and I would like to give the opportunity for the other speakers to actually speak to the current motion, because it's often a challenge for people to switch. We'll let Una address this.
Point of order, Madam Chair. We don't have a current motion. I have signified an intention to move one, so mine is first on the agenda, please.
And can I signal, Madam Chair, that I will be seconding Councillor Sturt's motion?
Okay, well in that case, put your motion, Councillor Kent.
Okay, I move that the committee recommends that the prostitution bylaw be referred back to staff and the RMA Policy Committee to see if it can be dispensed with and to see if there is sufficient protection within the existing district plan that will make a prostitution bylaw unnecessary.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Raukawa-Tait. So that's the motion that is under discussion at the moment. And some of these issues may be addressed at a rolling review of the district plan. That is my understanding, but I will actually let Rosemary speak to this first. Thank you, Rosemary.
So I'd just like to point out that when we went out for consultation, it was actually on just correcting one spelling mistake. So in fairness, if there were going to be substantial changes proposed, we would need to do another round of public consultation. The submissions we received were based on the understanding there weren't many changes proposed, and I think that there will be some different submitters that would come forward if they saw such significant changes proposed.
I think I'll just before it is, we have to remind ourselves that this bylaw has come up. We only have 15, so we have very few bylaws compared to many other councils around the country. This bylaw has come up simply by virtue that it's due to be reviewed. It had one typo in it. We had 3 submissions. It isn't causing any concern out there in the community that we are aware of, and it's going to cost quite a lot to reconsider whether we get rid of it when its ability to be a bylaw actually hasn't caused any issues for the community. So bear that in mind, and I understand the philosophy behind the desire to not have one, but do bear in mind whether we're actually cracking a nut with a sledgehammer. And that's a point. Although the bylaw has been in existence, most of us didn't even look at it until it came up for review, and it was only going out of a typo. There was not huge community consultation over that. The issues of ground floor can be dealt with in a rolling review of the district plan. So I'd just like to let you consider those issues before we fight to send some more work to the staff over an issue that out in the community is causing very little concern. So I will move through the questions as we were now. We had Mrs. Trumpet, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I'm going to concur with Councillor Kent and Raukawa-Tait, basically. I was actually going to see how we could get around some of these draconian laws, and one of them was the ground floor level. I think that has to go. Today we actually, Rotorua, I was absolutely passionate about any design in the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre changing, that we had to, there is a standard for disability access. I wanted to see it raised above the standard so that we actually meet everyone's needs and that there was very little restriction. And I think, you know, if that can be addressed somehow. And the other thing was the clarification around the small owner-operated brothel, the definition of a brothel, and there was the 2 people and the 4 people, and the clarification around that. I thought that was extremely confusing. If you're going to have a policy, it needs to be absolutely clear. And the other one was, let me see, sorry, I'm still trying to find my marks. Oh, so residential area, we also have, you know, outside of the residential area, are you classing it as a Rotorua district or residential only in the urban areas? Because I just needed some clarification around that. Thank you.
The restriction in the bylaw as it is was just around the CBD and the map. And just your question around the 2 different definitions, the district plan rule around small businesses, home-based businesses, sets a certain number, but the definition of a small owner-operated brothel, the definition we've used is from the Prostitution Reform Act. So that's why that says 4, but our district plan, which covers a whole lot of other things, has set the number differently as one more than the people living at the residence. I agree it's confusing. Their tools are for different purposes.
Thank you. And we now have Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm in pretty well in agreement with the previous speakers. I have noted that we only have 15 bylaws in Rotorua, and I think that's an indication that we don't particularly like them, and this is a legal activity, and so I think in general the idea of removing the bylaw is a good one. I just want to acknowledge the people who came and submitted to us, because I think everyone who put in submissions, whether they're oral or written, did a fantastic job. They're really coherent, really informative, made me go away and think about this quite deeply. My understanding around why we're keeping the bylaw at the moment is that there are some areas of the district plan that would need to be modified to cover us. So When we were looking at the previous version of the recommendation, I was going to suggest that by the time this became reviewed again in 2029, we would be looking at removing it because we had adjusted the district plan to cope with this within there. So I am aware that we would need to do some work on the district plan. And that might give us an opportunity to sort out that difference between 2, 4, those sorts of issues around the SUBs. I think the other question I was going to ask was around the ground floor restriction again. And I've heard what you've said about it, but it seems to me that we haven't removed it because of negative reasons rather than positive reasons. So it's an assumption that there's an issue with ground floor premises in the CBD rather than there actually being one in particular. And I think that the access issues in that outweigh any imagined issue about having a ground floor business. And once again, I come back to it's a legal occupation, and any restricting or not victimisation, but discrimination there does put a lot of people in this profession in general in New Zealand at risk. The more discrimination, the more at risk those vulnerable people in that profession are. And I was aware of that when I lived in Wellington, for instance, where there were a lot of issues around workers. And I think that was part of the impetus for changing the law to provide better security for these people. So, that's my point of view. And I guess my question is, was there any positive reason for restricting ground floor access?
I believe when it was originally put in, the view of the community submitters and the councillors at the time was that they didn't want those things, the appearance in the CBD at ground level, and that was what was appropriate at the time. And we'd had no particular submissions previously strongly about that. It really came up particularly at the hearing when it was around disability access that was raised at that point. And again, I'd just make the point that some of these changes are things which we hadn't consulted on, so the ability for me to propose to you significant things which would then require further consultation, but it has a limit of what I have put before you today.
Just, Mr Thomas, on the district plan for the CBD, the ground floor areas, essentially it's been captured under the aspect that we wanted accommodation on the second floors and we wanted shop frontages on the ground floor. So it has merely been captured under that aspect, not particularly directed at this group of businesses. Now I have Mrs Mulkey and then I have Councillor Gould.
Morena tātou. I guess I just want to pick up on your point, Councillor Hunter, regarding the moving the process into RMA is actually going to make it a wider process of consultation, and just mindful that you could open a can of worms if you go there. In terms of the scope of consultation and the ability for the wider, in this process it was quite a limited consultation group. So just putting that on the table, and I think too that it's, if it ain't broke, doesn't need fixing. What the points that were raised in the submissions were particularly around the ability to set up in residential areas, and the submissions were really clear and succinct about that. And I thought that there were the proposed changes to address that were quite suitable. Again, I thought the 4 to 2. I think I didn't see 4 come up in the last one, but that you pointed out as part of the definition that comes from, where did you say that came from? Sorry?
The definition of a small owner of a brothel was from the Prostitution Reform Act.
Right, so that's critical with that understanding now what's gone from 2 to 4. In terms of signage, again, I think the district plan would pick up on the signage issues, whether the whole process needs to go to the RMA committee. I pick up on the point it's an additional piece of work for something that's not been pushed other than around this table. The other thing is probably the ground floor issue. Again, it wasn't raised so much in terms of in town, but that the ability for this is from my memory anyway, that the disability issue was about access, and that was more to support the push for residential premises. So yeah, I'm thinking we just need to stay in scope with the submissions rather than what our personal beliefs are, and yeah, and I think there's a little bit of that coming through today. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mrs. Mulkey. Now, we have an opportunity here. I've had a number of speakers speaking for the motion on the table at the moment, so we could, we have an opportunity now either to hear some against the motion, or Councillor Kent, yes.
Madam Chair, can we please reinstate point 2, which still needs to be in there?
Yes. That's all right, thank you. So, would someone like to speak against the motion? I'm happy to hear the other speakers, which are Councillor Gould and Councillor Sturt, but if there's really going to be, again, speaking in support of, then we are able to actually move the motion without going further. Sorry, Councillor Gould, did you turn your mic on, please?
Before you put the motion, I'd like a question answered, please.
Certainly.
If that's possible.
Certainly.
My question is to do with page 13. I don't know whether the council's going to control it or whether the council's going to become the policeman, but the words in question is the first paragraph, which I quote, workers retains control over his or her individual earnings. Now that could be very difficult with somebody owning a property, and I don't know how council's going to control that.
Rosemary, would you like to address that?
Okay.
It's actually not to do with the motion we have on the table at the moment, Councillor Gould, but I will actually allow Rosemary to answer
that's really defining what a small owner-operated brothel is. It's part of the definition, which means that there's not somebody else managing the person's self-managing their own business and their own income. I think it's part of the definition. I don't think it's something that officers would be involved in, particularly going out to assess.
Does that clarify that for you? So that isn't up for us to debate here. It is simply how a single owner-operated brothel is defined. Now, I have Councillor Sturt and Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think prior to 2009, this activity was illegal. People were arrested, bundled into police cars, etc., workers, and anyone who operated a brothel was severely dealt with by the law. So in 2009, when we were requested to create a bylaw by central government to control this activity, the existing bylaw was the result. One, we had submissions, severe submissions from the business community stating they did not want it on the ground floor. That most other brothels or strip joints that were active at that stage were up on the first floor, and they did not want to see this activity at street level. Neither did they want to see touting, beside a school or a kindy or a church this was the environment in 2009, and I think you should be made aware of it. Things have moved on. Since that, since 2009, we have had no incidences that I'm aware of where the bylaw has had to be enacted. I think obviously the Auckland and the Wellington experience, Christchurch was a little bit different. Rotorua hasn't had a hugely active brothel industry, more so in Tauranga with the shipping and that sort of thing. But I think what Councillor Kent and Raukawa-Tait have moved doesn't close the door on us having any restrictions. Because, of course, we haven't consulted the community on whether we want brothels at street level. We've only consulted them. They have only. We had no submissions stating that you know, because we weren't removing it from the top floor or putting it on the ground floor. So I think we could open a can of worms there. So I think that the committee recommends to council that prostitution bylaw be referred back to the staff and the RMA policy committee to see if there is adequate protection within existing legislation for the proposed if there is adequate protection within the existing legislation for the provisions of the current bylaw, because I think that would tidy it up. I don't think that it be unnecessary, as we're already saying we think it's unnecessary, but we want the staff to go back and just check that we've got current policies and current legislation in place, including the prostitution bylaw, law, which has certain protections. So I think if Councillor Kent and Councillor Raukawa-Tait would be amenable to an amendment that is adequate protection with the existing legislation for the protections as the current bylaw, and that would cover signage, it would cover access, it would cover all sorts of manner of things. I mean, otherwise we're just going to give the staff a huge amount of work, and I agree with Mrs. Moy that we haven't consulted the community on removing all the provisions of the current bylaw, but I think that's got to stay as it is until we get this report back stating from the RMA policy committee that these things are catered for currently, because there are protections within the current bylaw that the community demanded at that stage in 2009. I know things have changed, but I think we need to wait until we get that information in front of us before we go throwing things out and putting things in without consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Tait. I'm now going to let the Chief Executive just speak to this issue first.
Excuse me, thank you, through the Chair. So councillors, there is a window, a 2-year window, within which this bylaw stays in place while this piece of work is actually being undertaken. So what you're signalling through this motion is a wish to revisit the nature of the change you wish to make to the bylaw. In the absence of you making a further decision and potentially going out to further consultation, the current bylaw unamended stays in place. Yeah. So effectively you don't have a risk at this particular time as to removing the current bylaw. The bylaw stays in place while you undertake this piece of work. And as I say, you've got a 2-year period within which to do that. It may be that when the RMA Policy Committee with staff look at it, it's determined that you want to take a longer time frame, and at that stage you may want to come back and say, let's make some changes to the existing bylaw while further work is actually undertaken or while consultation is undertaken. So really what this is doing is actually putting a marker that you wish some more work to be done, but while you are doing this work, the current bylaw does stay in place.
So just further to that, Jeff, essentially we could move the original recommendation and have this as an additional point there, because we need we're either going to have the current bylaw or we're going to have the bylaw that we've done some amendment on. We'd need to vote on that first. I understand we'll need to go through that, Councillor Kent. Let me finish. But if this fails, then if we voted in the existing bylaw, we could then someone else could add another amendment to the motion to essentially refer this to the RMA Policy Committee to do work on it as and when that comes up, to do exactly this, to decide whether it's necessary. And then that becomes a piece of consultation that goes out in the future. So now I'm just going to let Councillor Donaldson speak first, and then you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Succinctly put, and I would support that course of action, because currently I think there's something like 27 SUBs out there who are operating illegally in the terms of the existing bylaw. So I think getting the work that's done that's proposed in the motion at point 3 up there is something that I would like to see added to the original. Just for clarification, around the clean copy of the bylaw, and just to be pedantic, on page 23, at the top there in paragraph B, should that be the services, providing the services or another person rather than of another person? I just want to make sure the clean copy is clean. If what I would like to see happen is that we put the amended proposal through, and so voting against the amendment on its own at this stage, I just get the answer to that one first, and also as regards to supporting going with the amended bylaw in the immediate, the issue raised by Councillor Sturt from the previous consultation when the bylaw was first put in place regarding dispensing with touting because of concerns around health and safety of sex workers. I think one of the things that certainly has changed is health and safety and employment legislation, and so that becomes an issue to be addressed by the owners of the premises, the operators of the premises, to look after their workers. So I would be supporting sticking with the original motion, but certainly adding on the proposed amendment as a piece of work to get straight on with, just so that the 27 SUBs out there are no longer an illegal activity, and also to dispense with that touting aspect. But just my question about that one little typo.
Yes, so I found another one too, which I will correct before it will go to council.
Thank you. And technically, it's not an amendment. It is the motion on the table at the moment, just to clarify. Now, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The bylaw as amended as was proposed is totally unsatisfactory. It has got conflicts in it, which make it totally unclear. And there's another one I've just picked up here, under 1.5D, refers to 2 sex workers providing commercial services. So the thing is not right. To actually put it into effect is bad legislation and should not be done. What I have recommended is that we throw this back to staff and the RMA committee. I don't believe there's any more than a week's work here. Because in reality, when you look and see what the bylaw actually does, it only defines what a brothel is and presumably should be updated to include what a SUB is, because it's not in there. It defines where a brothel is allowed to be located. Well, that can be very quickly inserted into the district plan under the different residential, rural residential, etc., very quickly inserted. The other one issue is signage. That's already included in the district plan and covered in great detail. And I can't see anything in here under signage that even remotely conflicts with what's in the district plan or is even any additional to it. So we only have a question of location and definitions. If we can't put those in a small amendment to the district plan, put it out to public consultation, sure, because we signify to them we are making this amendment to the district plan for the sole purpose of doing away with the prostitution bylaw, which is no longer necessary. And we will get immediate feedback from all those who are interested, and we can nail the thing and get it done properly once and for all.
I totally accept where you're coming from, Councillor Kent. This is the existing bylaw, though, that will continue to be in place and all of those things you have highlighted were in the existing bylaw, and they're going to be in whichever bylaw we pass today. So whether it's the one that's the 2009 that carries on, or whether it's the one that if we choose to vote it now. I've got Mrs. Mohi next.
Just following on from the discussions, I just want to reiterate the issue around been proposed did not come through with any of the submissions. I think that I like the new resolution, or whatever we call it. However, to the end there, the only thing I think is what you suggested, Charles, was to see if it was in alignment with the district plan, or whatever the words you used there, but particularly I think as long as there's no conflict between the bylaw and the plan, particularly around signage, traffic, you know, these were the issues that were raised in the submissions, was traffic, noise, and the other point really is that until we sort this out, these people are still going to be operating in a legal state, and that was their biggest issue, and that was a safety issue for them, because people were, you know, using that as a leverage to get things that weren't, you know, kosher, by saying we'll bring someone and tell tales on you because you're not doing what I want you to do. So to me, the biggest, if we're talking about safety, it's about getting these existing SUVs legal. And then the rest of these other issues, I don't think that's the main one for me anyway. So I don't support the motion as it is. However, I would, if there was those proposed changes, the proposed bylaw to be in alignment, or, you know, to aligned against the RMA.
Okay, now we're starting to get into second round of debate, so I'm going to end the debate there at that point. I just will make a clarification that currently the small owner-operated businesses in the residential areas are not operating illegally. The interpretation of the bylaw was that some people read it that way. That is not the intention. It wasn't clarified and it wasn't spelt out, and the point of the bylaw review is to clarify and spell out that any small owner-operated brothel, a SUB, in the residential area is operating as any other small business under the restrictions and direction of the district plan. So they're not operating illegally. We just wanted this current bylaw clarifies that. If we stay with the existing bylaw, then that is still a grey area for some people in their interpretation. Now, the motion we have on the table is that the committee recommends to council that the prostitution bylaw be referred back to staff and the RMA policy committee to see if there is adequate protection within existing legislation for the proposed bylaw to be unnecessary. I'll leave it as Councillor Stewart.
If the recommendation is moved by Councillor Kent and Councillor Raukawa-Tait is successful, I'll give notice that I will move item 4 down to, because I don't think it conflicts, I think it's complementary to, but it enshrines the current bylaw, which is in place, which we have not moved to revoke. And we could be in limbo, and as you have just explained, there could be more doubt put in place with those current operators that it could be challenged that they are operating illegally. If we don't endorse the current...
I'm going to move the motion, Councillor Stewart, and then we'll see where that sits after that point. Okay, so that is the motion on the table. Is everyone quite clear about what they're supporting or not supporting? Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Kent and seconded by Councillor Raukawa-Tait. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? No. So...
It's carried.
That is carried.
Okay, Madam Chair, I wish to move item 3, that consideration be given to the requirements of the Prostitution Reform Act 2003 and the Local Government Act 2002, as is up
Councillor
there.
Kent, Councillor Stewart, beg your pardon, that's actually not possible for you to do that unless it was part of the original motion.
It's contradictory.
It's contradictory to the motion that we've just passed, and that was what those who voted against were hoping to achieve. So
why wasn't that pointed out? That's why I gave intention that I was going to move. Why wasn't that pointed out prior to us voting?
I do believe I did explain that to the committee, that we are now, so the motion that we have passed leaves us with the 2009 bylaw as is, without the amendments and without the clarification.
Okay, but it does give cause for staff to come back with
yes,
where it fits.
It does, but
okay.
we are now
all
with
right,
the
we're
existing
happy with
bylaw prior to going out for consultation. Right. Okay, so I believe we are now finished on that issue. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your debate on that. We'll now move on to our next recommendation. Thank you very much, Rosemary. And that is on page 43. Thank you, and I'd just like to welcome, we have Steph Kelly here, and we also have Paroni Pireki representing Te Ororo o Te Rangi and Ngāti Unuku Kopaku, and we have Henry Weston here. Tēnā koutou. So please, page 43, and this is the recommendation, the draft Hannahs Bay and Waikawa Reserve Management Plan. So I leave it in your hands, Henry. Thank you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and kia ora koutou councillors and board members. And look, I'll do no more than pass on to Paroni and to Steph to really give you the background to this, and particularly to talk about the process of getting to where they've got to and where it's hopefully heading from here. But I'll hand over to Steph and Paroni.
Thank you.
Morena. Thank you, Madam Chair, Morena committee members. Before I introduce this report, I just want to again acknowledge Paroni's presence here today. It really represents the partnership approach that we've taken to the development of this management plan. So really my intent is just to provide a brief introduction to the report and then pass over to Paroni, who can speak on behalf of the hapu. So essentially this reserve management plan has been prepared under the Reserves Act, which is the leading piece of legislation that governs the management of reserves. But in addition to that, the Te Arawa Treaty settlement legislation puts some further obligations on Council to, I guess, recognise the significance of this particular reserve to Unuku Kopako and Te Roro Te Rangi as having mana whenua for this space. So in acknowledging that, Council and the two hapu entered into an MOU, really cementing our partnership approach, and I'm really pleased to say that from my perspective anyway, it's been a really successful process. We've undertaken some significant community engagement, and the management plan really reflects the joint aspirations of both hapu and Council, but also really reflects the community. So before I kind of go through the content of the plan, I'd just like to hand over to Paroni to speak from his perspective.
Kia ora tatakato, ko prāne pirika te ingoa. So this, what I'm going to talk about is relationships. Tērā te mea pai kia tātou ko ta whakawhanangatanga pēhea tanga mua tērā. So what I'm saying is, it's important that the relationships are trusting to move forward. So that was one of the keys that when we first met with Steph and the team from the council and worked the relationship to where we could get to a place where we can get to a document that we were all happy with. The other part of that was putting a lot of Māori values back into that document. Key values back into that document so people will understand our point of view and how we view Ranginui and Papatūānuku. Because one of the things that has come out of that, I'll flick back to this other part. Relationships that we had with the community. So we already had a relationship, a long relationship with Mokoia community. Out of that came the Eastside Collective. That Eastside Collective is now called Tatau Pounamu. I wish I had brought this thing along. I could have done some marketing here today in terms of Tatau Pounamu and where we're going with it. However, key to that, again, was relationships. From those relationships, and these are posts that we use, we were able to build a whakapapa. We were able to instill a whakapapa from our point of view, our stories, our knowledge of the area, and then build this whakapapa into our relationship with Steph. Also sharing with Steph in her group the relationship in the whakapapa that we had with Mokoia community and that we had with East Side and that we have with Tatau Pounamu. So Tatau Pounamu is a place, a safe place for, using an old Māori metaphor to describe a safe place for all. I won't get into too much detail into that. You've probably got it on your, no, you won't have it on there, not Tatau Pounamu. However, the whole emphasis was knowing that the taiao and educating people on the taiao, ranginui and Papatuanuku, in its wellness in comparison to living people's wellness. So, kamihi atu kia koe Tania, ko tō rā ko tō rōpu e whakakiki atu nei tērā taha wā te peheatanga wā tāta nei tai ao, te peheatanga wā tāta. Wā tātou nei tamariki mokopuna kairati wā tāta nei kura. So, big ups to our kids, our children in the schools, doing that little 1 hour, 2 hour protest in terms of climate change. Because this is a lot of what we're doing in terms of this reserve. Is how do we clean our climate up? Because if our climate is not clean, if our rangi nui and Papatuanuku are in stress, so are we. So are we. And that's been reflected in a lot of the stats, especially for Māori. Especially for Māori. So, working with this group has given us an opportunity to educate, given an opportunity for people to, for us to share some of our ideas and how we can make Rotorua a safe place. However, we got to do it on a small scale. I understand that. We got to roll out our example first. So we're just working within our mana area, our mana whenua area. So from Puringa to Waiohewa, that is the area we are working with. With our taiao and with our living. And trying to get a good balance, make it a safe place right along that corridor. So, yeah, so when it came to doing this document, it was really quite easy to make it work. Really quite easy to make it work. I'm going to leave it there for a little while. One day I will come back with Tatau Pounamu to the whole of Rotorua, and because we're going to tauira it out on the east side and what Tatau Pounamu looks like for us. Similar to what you're talking about, try to make a safe, clean space, happy place for our tamariki mokopuna. So we've got to work the whole lot together. So I'm called, what am I called? What am I called, Steph? What do you call me? I like to be known as an interferer.
I think we prefer well-respected co-marshal
on
our side of the table. So
cool. That sounds nice too.
So thank you for that. Before I open it up for questions, I was remiss in asking for this report to be received. So the resolution, so Councillor Kent and Councillor Donaldson, that the report draft Hannah's Bay, Waikawa Bay Reserve Management Plan be received. Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Okay, thank you. And I also would just like to acknowledge Lee sitting in the gallery there in support from Eastside and Shirley and other Eastside residents there. So thank you. It does make a difference to the councillors seeing the support from the community, and we do appreciate you turning up. Now I will open that up for questions. Mrs. Mohi, and then Councillor Donaldson first, then Councillor Sturt.
Tēnā tātou, tēnā koe te rangatira, nei rā te mihi ki a koutou, nā te unuku kōpako, ka tika me ko koutou te kai whakahaere o tēnei whenua, nā koutou te whenua, ka hoki mai te mana ki a koutou, so nō reira nā mihi ki a koutou. I just wanted to acknowledge the work that's been done by the council. Whenua, which is of course highly significant to the hapu, And it's great to see that that they're in that driving seat now, looking after the taiao. The relationships are critical to making sure that we get the benefits, not just for a small sector of the community, but for everyone. And I'm just going to be a little bit red here, but I think, you know, what's good for Māori is good for everybody. And when we're talking about the taiao and the principles that tangata whenua bring to the table, I absolutely stand by that. So, ai, me haere koutou. Kia ora.
I'll accept there wasn't necessarily a question there, Mrs Mohi, but Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I do have a question, but tēnā koe Parani and tēnā koutou East Side Collective, whoever they may be, that's my question. Apart from the other acknowledgements, can I acknowledge Rosemary, who's the current chair of the Makoia Community Association? So possibly wearing two hats in here today. So my question, through you, Madam Chair, Steph, which entities comprise the East Side Collective, please? Apart from Mana Whenua, which I understand.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, just to clarify, are you asking who was involved in the preparation of the document in terms of the steering group or the ongoing East Side Community Collective, whose mandate is much broader than just Hannah's Bay Reserve?
So my question is directed towards part 3 of the recommendation, which is appointing 3 community, and I acknowledge Shirley is here with her secretary of the Hannah's Bay Holdens Bay Ratepayers Association, and Rosemary with her position, which I've questioned, raised. So the East Side Collective, I think I was present at one of the early workshops on this initiative. We're being asked today to appoint people to represent and hear submissions. So I just wanted clarity around which entities have been involved as part of the East Side Collective working with Mana Whenua to bring this consultation document to us.
I'm just going to interrupt there, Councillor Donaldson. Recommendation 3 is actually to appoint councillors to a hearings panel to hear submissions. It's not to appoint community representatives to the ongoing group. That is in somewhere else in the document, and I can understand how that's not particularly clear there. So when we do get to recommendation 3, I will clarify that for everybody, but it is simply for the councillors around the table to select a hearing panel from the councillors to hear the submissions following the public consultation. We sometimes as a council, all of us hear submissions, and sometimes we decide that a smaller group will hear submissions. So that's what's being proposed here, if that clarifies.
Thank you for that clarification.
That's right.
It wasn't clear to me at all.
No, I know, and I understand. On my first read, I initially thought and then went back to the recommendation. So that is, hopefully that's clarified for everybody. Other questions for our panel here today? Yes, Councillor Stewart. Yes.
And welcome, Parione and Steph. Want to acknowledge the work that you've done to get to the stage that you're producing a reserves management plan that can go out for consultation. I think you highlighted in your korero, Parione, the need for partnership and real partnership. Having been around this table for a long, long time, the relationship of years gone by hasn't been good with Te Una Kōpako and Te Roirangi, and I think this is a good stepping stone to renewing those bonds. This is a significant piece of reserve, significant not only to Te Una Kōpako but also the people of Rotorua. It's highly used and it's highly revered. The resource management plan, the reserves management plan that you produced has been long coming. I can remember, Steph, I think I was one of the few councillors, I think Councillor Donaldson might have attended, went out to the community day and saw the wellness and the good feeling amongst the community about where they wanted that reserve to head. And Parione, you are to be encouraged in your enlightened view of seeing if we can get something from Rotorua City right through to the airport in terms of of accessing management. I also want to acknowledge those involved in Mokoe Community Association and the Eastsides Collective, which I'm interested also to know what the membership of, because I think it could be a very powerful force in terms of turning things around. And if it includes the Mokoe Community Association, which has a long-standing reputation of advocating strongly for that community out there, I'm all in favour of it. Just one thing, Steph, under the Reserves Act, because you've produced a reserves management plan, does that have to go out to public consultation? Because I thought the consultation had already occurred with affected parties in terms of the community with the open days and the development of the resource management plan, which you haven't just plucked out of thin air, and also with the input of Ngāti Una Kōpako and iwi representatives. So why do we now have to go out to public consultation on it? I thought that had already been done.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt, and through you, Madam Chair. The Reserves Act is very prescriptive in the process for developing a reserve management plan. It actually includes a two-stage consultation process where you're doing a significant review. So the first step really is to gather information to inform the preparation of the draft, and the second process is that formal consultation process where we request submissions and people need to be given the opportunity to be heard. So we are required under legislation to undertake this next stage.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Gould.
Yeah, clarification really for the people listening to the debate this morning. We're talking about Hannah's Bay Reserve, the reserve lake edge closest to the airport on the side closest to the city. That is correct, isn't it?
It is correct.
So if there are no further questions, yes, Henry.
Madam Chair, just a small clarification and an apology to the committee. I think I've helped contribute to the confusion around the appointment of the panel by having in that first bullet point a more specific reference to a composition of a panel while leaving it open underneath. What we're really suggesting is, look, it's up to you as a committee to determine who you want to be on your hearings panel. We've put 5 boxes in there, but obviously up to you to determine the number and composition.
Yes, Councillor Sturt.
Would it be appropriate through you, Madam Chair, that a member of Ngāti Una Kōpako and the other group from Te Roirangi, Ngāti Te Roro o Te Rangi, also be part of those 5 that hear those submissions in the true spirit of partnership?
No, it wouldn't actually, because
that would
limit their ability to be submitters.
Okay.
And so this is a council decision.
Under the Local Government Act.
Under the Local Government Act. So, and again, to reiterate what Stephanie said, the working group putting this together a much smaller microcosm of the macrocosm of the people who live out there. And again, you gather the ideas, you get the general direction, and then we go out to public consultation and we ask them, do you think we've got it pretty much right, and where else could we tweak it? And we get the feedback, we make those decisions as a council, and then that ideally is accepted. If not, then it can be appealed. So yes, okay. Councillor Kent and then Mrs Mohi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate all of those involved in putting this together. It is a high-class document. It is very clear, very easy to understand, and covers everything that you can conceivably think of. It's been done exceedingly well, and I congratulate you on that. I'm going to suggest, Madam Chair, that I'm happy to move 2 if someone likes to second it, and then we can get on to deciding who should or should not take part in it.
Councillor Kent. So I was going to put the motion separately to avoid any confusion. So we'll put recommendation 2, that the committee recommends to council that the draft Hannah's Bay Waikawa Reserve Management Plan be approved for public consultation pursuant to section 41(6) of the Reserves Act 1977. I have Councillor Kent has moved, Councillor Sturt has seconded. Is there any further debate on that? If not, then I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried unanimously. That's very nice. Now we'll move on to recommendation 3. So As Henry has said, there are 5 boxes. If we think that if the committee believes there should be more people to that hearing, please speak and we can vote on the numbers. Otherwise, we'll leave it at 5. So I'll open that recommendation 3 for questions. Councillor Raukawa-Tait.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to leave it at 5. I think that would allow for a good range of views to come forward. Having said that, then I would like to move. Is it move or make a suggestion that Councillor Charles Stewart be a member of that hearings panel? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to get clarification on whether we will get all 5 or whether we will have a mover and a seconder for each nomination. Is it required? No, just we'll get all 5. Okay, Mrs. Mohi.
Kia ora, just on behalf of Te Tatau Board, we have had a discussion and the Chair has put through that Eugene Berryman be the nominated person for Te Tatau, if that sits well with the hapu.
Excellent. In his absence, we'll vote him on. That's always good. Volunteered by. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Yes, thank you. And I haven't had a discussion with the member, but I would like to suggest Chair of the Lakes Community Board, Mr. Phil Thomas, be on the panel.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Now, do we have any other suggestions for... Yes, Councillor Stewart.
Councillor Tapsell, I'd be happy to nominate Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you. And Councillor Maxwell.
The RMA.
Sorry, turn your microphone on. Sorry, Councillor Maxwell, you will have to repeat that so it can actually be recorded.
Yeah, I'd like to nominate you, Madam Chair, Councillor Hunt, but with your experience in hearings and various things in the district plan. Councillor Hunt. Thank you. Okay, so the members, the councillors for the hearing panel are Councillor Sturt, Mr. Eugene Berryman Camp from Te Tata o Te Arawa, Mr. Phil Thomas from the Lakes Community Board, Chair of the Lakes Community Board, Councillor Tapsell and Councillor Hunt. I'll open that up for discussion. There appears I need a mover and a seconder for that. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper, and thank you, Mrs. Mohi. So that's been moved by Mrs. Trumper and seconded by Mrs. Mohi. I will put that motion to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you everyone for that excellent conversation around that, and thank you very much for the panel for presenting. We look forward to seeing those submissions come in. Okay, we now need a resolution to exclude the public. So and the reasons for this are to adopt the confidential minutes of the previous meeting and to consider 2 confidential reports regarding 1, the disposal of a council-owned property, and 2, the concept design for Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre. These 2 items need to be considered in public excluded to enable commercial or industrial negotiations and to enable commercial activities, so they're not able to be heard in public. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper, and thank you, Mr. Thomas. Moved and seconded. Councillor Sturt.
To